Hey everyone, welcome back to K-Korner, the channel where we dive into the wild world of entitled people and their unbelievable stories. Hope you enjoy it, and without further ado, let's go. My parents were the type that wanted me to be perfect in every way, from my grades to my social status. They never hesitated to remind me that they paid for everything in my life and that I owed them. Growing up, I always had to toe the line, never daring to do anything that would anger them. I went to the college they wanted me to, studied the degree they deemed appropriate, and even picked up a job in the same company as my father. I was living my life according to their whims, and I thought I was doing a great job of it. Until my grandfather passed away. He left me a considerable amount of inheritance, which didn't sit well with my parents. Suddenly, they were demanding that I give them the money, arguing that they had paid for my upbringing and deserved it. I was shocked and appalled, but I should have seen it coming. I was sitting in the living room, staring at the check that was now in my possession, trying to wrap my head around the situation when my parents walked in. "Give us the check, son." "We need it more than you do," my father said with a straight face. "What do you mean you need it more than me? This is my inheritance, and I have every right to keep it." My mother rolled her eyes. "Don't be ridiculous. You know how to handle money. We're just trying to protect you from yourself. You could spend it all away on drugs or something." I glared at them. "Protect me? From what?" "From actually having a life outside of the one you've dictated for me. I am done with this. I'm keeping the money." My parents didn't take kindly to my defiance. They started to make snide remarks about how ungrateful and disrespectful I was. They even went as far as to suggest that they would cut me off completely if I didn't give them the money. It was a constant battle from then on. My parents would try to guilt, trip me, or manipulate me into giving them the inheritance, but I refused to budge. I knew that this was the first step towards gaining control over my own life. The tension in the house was unbearable, and I could feel my parents' anger simmering just below the surface. They were used to getting what they wanted, and I wasn't backing down this time. One day, my father had been drinking heavily, and I could tell that he was spoiling for a fight. He cornered me in the kitchen, and before I knew it, he had grabbed me by the collar and slammed me against the wall. "Give us the damn money, you ungrateful brat!" he shouted in my face. I saw red. All of the years of pent-up frustration and anger came boiling to the surface, and I shoved him away from me. "You're not getting a cent, Dad." "Get over it," I spat out, my heart racing. He lunged at me again, but this time I was ready for him. I sidestepped him and watched as he stumbled and fell to the ground, his face red with rage. "Wow, Dad, nice move. Did you learn that in anger management?" I said sarcastically, my own anger now turning into amusement. I knew at that moment that I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I couldn't continue living under their thumb, always being told what to do and how to live my life. It was time for me to take control of my own destiny. The next day, I started looking for apartments online, and within a week I found a place that I could afford. I packed up my things and moved out of my parents' house, leaving behind all the rules and restrictions that had been holding me back for so long. At first, I was scared. I had never lived on my own before, and the thought of being responsible for everything was overwhelming. But as the days went by, I started to feel more and more empowered. I was finally able to make my own decisions and live my life on my own terms. It wasn't easy, of course. There were bills to pay, groceries to buy, and a whole host of other responsibilities that I had never even thought about before. But every time I felt overwhelmed, I reminded myself of why I had left in the first place. I had to keep moving forward no matter what. Slowly but surely, I started to build a life for myself. I made new friends, started dating, and even found a job that I loved. And every time my parents called, demanding that I give them the money, I simply hung up the phone. I had made my decision, and I was sticking to it. It was a typical Tuesday evening when I heard a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was hesitant to answer. But when I looked through the peephole, I saw my parents standing outside. "What do you want?" I asked, my heart racing. "We need to talk, son," my father said, his voice serious. Reluctantly, I opened the door and let them inside. We sat down in the living room, and my parents wasted no time in getting to the point. "We need the money, son. We're in a tough spot right now, and we could really use your help. my mother said, her voice soft. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Hadn't we already been through this? I had made it clear that I wasn't going to give them the money. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. I have my own bills to pay, and I can't just hand over the money that my grandfather left me, I replied firmly. My parents didn't take it well. They started to raise their voices, and before I knew it, we were arguing again. It was like we were back in their house, and nothing had changed. The argument went on for what felt like hours. My parents tried every trick in the book to convince me to give them the money, from guilt, tripping me to threatening to cut me off completely. But I refused to back down. Finally, they gave up and left. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I couldn't believe that they had come to my house and demanded money again. It was like they couldn't accept that I was living my own life now. Over the next few weeks, I received several phone calls and texts from my parents and my extended family, all asking for the money. I tried to ignore them, but it was hard. They were my parents, after all, and I still loved them. But eventually, I had had enough. I couldn't take the constant demands and arguments anymore. So I sent them a message, telling them that I loved them, but that I couldn't give them the money, and that I'm leaving the country to go chase my dreams of traveling the world. It was a hard decision, but I knew it was the right one. I had to live my own life and make my own decisions, even if it meant going against my parents. In the end, my parents did eventually move on. They stopped calling and texting me, and we didn't talk for a while. But eventually, we were able to rebuild our relationship, even if it wasn't exactly the same as it had been before. As for me, I was proud of myself for standing up for myself and refusing to give in to their demand. It was a difficult situation, but it had taught me that sometimes you have to do what's best for you, even if it means going against the people you love. And I'm writing this from Thailand. That's where I'm living now. My name is Bella, and I was born and raised in a small town in the Midwest. I grew up with a single mom who worked multiple jobs to put food on the table. Life was tough, but we managed. My mom always told me to work hard and never give up, and I took those words to heart. Fast forward to my early 20s, and I found myself living in a big city trying to make ends meet. I had landed a job at a coffee shop and was doing my best to save up for college. That's when I met her, Layla. Layla was a socialite, born into a wealthy family. She would come into the coffee shop every day, ordering her fancy lattes and treating the staff like they were beneath her. I tried my best to be polite, but she always found a way to make me feel small. One day, Layla came into the shop, throwing her keys on the counter and demanding her usual drink. I noticed she had left her purse in the car and tried to tell her, but she wasn't having it. I don't have time for your excuses, just get me my drink. I made her drink and handed it to her, but as she turned to leave, her phone fell out of her purse. I picked it up and handed it to her, but she snatched it out of my hand and stormed out of the shop. That night, I received a call from my boss, telling me I'd been fired for stealing Layla's phone. I was stunned. I tried to explain what had happened, but he wouldn't listen. I was devastated. I felt powerless and angry as I walked home that night. I couldn't believe Layla had the audacity to accuse me of stealing when I was just trying to do the right thing. But instead of wallowing in self-pity, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I knew Layla's routine, and I had a plan. I was determined to get revenge on Layla for falsely accusing me of stealing her phone. So I spent several days researching and gathering information about her. I found out that she was attending a high-profile gala event in a few weeks, which was the perfect opportunity for my plan. Layla had hired a prestigious designer to create her dress for the event, and that's where I decided to intervene. I visited the designer studio that one of my dearest friends works at as a saleswoman to convince her to make a few subtle alterations to Layla's dress. I knew that I couldn't do anything too drastic or it would be too obvious. So I asked my friend to make the hemline slightly uneven and adjust the neckline to make it sit a little bit off center. I also made sure to pay close attention to the details of Layla's dress so that the alterations would blend in seamlessly. After all, I didn't want her to suspect that anything was wrong until it was too late. On the day of the gala, I managed to sneak into the event and watched as Layla made her grand entrance. She looked beautiful in her dress, but something was off. The subtle alterations I had asked the designer to make were just enough to throw her off her game. Layla started to fidget and adjust her dress, clearly uncomfortable and self-conscious, and her dress started to fall apart. She rushed as she tries to hold her dress, and she left the gala in a way that was so embarrassing for her. She may have been born into wealth and privilege, but she didn't have the resilience and determination that I had gained from my humble upbringing. Never treat people who serve you wrong. It might go wrong for you as well. I woke up on a Saturday morning with the sun shining bright through my window. I was excited for the day ahead because I had planned a picnic with my friends at the park. We had been looking forward to it for weeks. I quickly got dressed, grabbed my picnic basket, and headed out the door. As I arrived at the park, I noticed a commotion near the entrance. A woman was yelling at the security guard, demanding to be let in without paying the entrance fee. I tried to ignore it and walk towards my friends who were setting up our picnic spot. "Hey, guys. Sorry I'm late," I said as I approached them. "No worries. We just got here," replied my friend Sarah. "But have you seen that crazy woman over there?" I turned around to see the woman still arguing with the security guard. "Yeah, I saw her." "What's her deal?" "I don't know, but she's been causing a scene for the past 15 minutes, said Sarah. Just then, the woman stormed over to our picnic area. "Excuse me, but can you move your things?" This is where I always have my picnic. I was taken aback. Sorry, but we got here first. You can find another spot." The woman huffed. "Do you know who I am?" "I'm a regular here, and I always have this spot." "Move your things now." I rolled my eyes. "I don't care who you are." "We're not moving." The woman scowled at me. "You're being very disrespectful. My son deserves this spot more than you do. He's been looking forward to our picnic all week." I looked around and saw a young boy standing behind her, looking embarrassed. "I'm sorry, but we're not moving. We planned this picnic for weeks, and we're not going to give up our spot just because you're throwing a fit." The woman's face turned red with anger.
"How dare you speak to me like that?"
"I demand that you move your things right now." I shook my head. "No, I'm not going to argue with you anymore. We're staying here, and that's final." The woman let out a frustrated scream and lunged at me, trying to grab the picnic basket out of my hand. I quickly stepped back, narrowly avoiding her attack. "What's wrong with you?" I shouted at her. "You can't just attack people because you're not getting your way." The woman glared at me, her face twisted in rage. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you, you entitled brat?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Me? Entitled? Look in the mirror, lady. You're the one throwing a tantrum because you can't have what you want." The woman let out another scream and attempted to grab me again, but this time I was ready. I blocked her attack and pushed her away from me. She stumbled backward and fell to the ground. I looked down at her, feeling a mixture of anger and amusement. You really need to learn how to control your temper. Maybe try some yoga or something? The woman got up, still fuming. "I'm going to report you to the park authorities." "You'll be banned from this park for life?" I shrugged. "Go ahead. I have nothing to hide." Unlike you, I actually paid to enter this park. My friends and I continued with our picnic, ignoring the woman's continued shouts and screams. As we packed up to leave, the security guard came over to us. The woman turned her attention to the security guard. "You should be doing your job and not letting these entitled brats take over the park. I demand that you kick them out right now." The security guard raised his eyebrows. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I can't do that. They paid their entrance fee and have just as much right to be here as you do." The woman scoffed. "That's ridiculous. They're clearly causing disturbance. I demand that you call the park manager and have them removed." The security guard sighed. "Ma'am, I've already spoken to the park manager, and they have given us clear instructions not to engage with you. You're causing a disturbance, and I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The woman's face turned even redder. "How dare you?" "I demand to speak to your manager." The security guard just shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but my manager is not available at the moment. You need to leave the park now." We said to ourselves, enough picnic for the day, and we were ready to leave. As we were leaving the park, we heard shouting and commotion coming from behind us. We turned around to see the entitled woman had returned and was now physically attacking the security guard. "Get out of my way, you useless idiot," she yelled as she tried to push past him. The security guard was doing his best to keep her back, but she was surprisingly strong. Suddenly, The woman grabbed the security guard's shirt and pulled him towards her, getting ready to hit him. Without hesitation, the security guard pulled out a can of pepper spray and sprayed it directly in the woman's face. She screamed and stumbled back, her eyes burning and her nose running. "That's what you get for attacking a security guard," the guard said calmly as he restrained her. My friends and I watched in shock as the entitled woman was handcuffed and taken away by the police. It was a crazy ending to what had started as a peaceful day in the park. After the police had taken the woman away, the security guard came over to us to make sure we were okay. We thanked him for handling the situation and asked if he needed any help. "No, I'm good, thank you for asking. Time to teach this entitled witch a lesson," he replied with a smile. I smiled to myself as I thought about how the entitled woman got what she deserved. Maybe next time she'll think twice before causing a scene in public, or maybe she will think twice of her innocent child who did nothing wrong and watched his entitled mother getting her butt kicked. My name's Jack. Well, not really, but that's what I usually go by. Jack, age 72, retired and living life one day at a time. And yeah, I'm missing a leg. Thanks for noticing. It happened back in Nam. Got caught up in some nasty business. But that's a story for another time. Today, I want to tell you about an encounter I had with a real piece of work named Karen. So, I'm sitting there in my favorite diner, sipping on my coffee, waiting for my wife to join me. She's always running late, but hey, after all these years, I've learned to be patient. That's when Karen strolls in with her 3 little hellions in tow. Now, I'm all for families enjoying a meal together, but this lady had entitlement written all over her face. She spots my table, the only one available, and marches over like she owns the joint. "Excuse me, sir, but we need this table. My kids are hungry," she says, not even bothering with a please or a smile. I glance up at her, giving her a once-over. "Sorry, ma'am, but I'm waiting for someone," I reply, trying to be as polite as possible. Karen's face scrunches up like she just smelled something foul. "Waiting for someone? Who could possibly want to sit with a cripple like you?" she sneered. I take a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "I'm waiting for my wife," I say calmly. Her eyes narrow and she scoffs. "A wife? Please. How can someone with a missing leg have a wife?" she retorts, as if my disability somehow invalidates my ability to love and be loved. Now I've dealt with my fair share of ignorance over the years, but this was something else. I can feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I take another deep breath and try to keep my composure. "I suggest you find another table, Mom," I say, my voice steady but firm. Karen's face turns an alarming shade of red, and before I can blink, she raises her hand as if she's about to slap me. Instinct kicks in, and I grab my cane, swinging it up to block her attack. The metal connects with her hand, and she lets out a yelp of pain. "You dare to touch me, you old coyote! I'll have you arrested for assault," she screeches, clutching her hand. I shake my head, disbelief washing over me. "You're the one who tried to hit me, lady. Now, kindly leave before things escalate further." Just then, the owner of the diner, a burly man named Frank, comes rushing over, having witnessed the whole debacle. "What's going on here?" he demands, glaring at Karen. This man assaulted me," Karen cries, pointing a shaky finger at me. Frank crosses his arms, clearly unimpressed. "I saw the whole thing, lady. You tried to hit him first. Now, either you leave peacefully or I'll have to call the cops." Karen's face contorts with rage, but she knows she's beaten. With a huff, she gathers her kids and storms out of the diner, muttering curses under her breath. I let out a sigh of relief, leaning back in my chair. "Thanks, Frank," I say, grateful for his intervention. He gives me a nod, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "No problem, Jack. Some people just ain't got no manners." And with that, life in the diner returns to normal. I finish my coffee, still shaking my head at the audacity of some people. But hey, at least I can always count on a good cup of joe and a friendly face at Frank's place. Enjoying the stories yet? If you do, please subscribe, like, and comment. I'm not one to easily forgive or forget. Especially when someone has wronged me, I'll make sure they'll regret it for a long time. This is the story of how I got my nuclear revenge on a high school bully. My name is Alex, fake name, and I was always the quiet kid in school. I wasn't particularly interested in making friends or getting into trouble, but unfortunately, I still managed to catch the attention of the school bully. His name was Chris, and he was the typical alpha male, always surrounded by a group of followers and he thought he could get away with anything. Chris and his gang would often tease me, make fun of my clothes, and occasionally push me around. I didn't know how to stand up for myself, and it only made things worse. One day after school, I was walking home when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there he was, Chris, fake name with sinister smirk on his face. "Hey, loser, what are you doing after school?" "Gonna read some books, nerd?" I said to myself, "Of course, you idiot, what else I'm gonna read?" I tried to ignore him and keep walking, but he grabbed my backpack and pulled me back. I fell to the ground, and he started kicking me in the stomach. I felt sick and powerless. That day, I decided that I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Fast forward a few years, I'm in college. I'm studying computer science, and I'm doing well. One day, I received a message from Chris on Facebook. He wanted to apologize for how he treated me in high school and asked if we could meet up. At first, I was skeptical, but I decided to give him a chance. We met at a coffee shop, and Chris seemed genuinely sorry. He said he had changed and wanted to make it up to me. I was hesitant, but I agreed to meet up with him again. He was so surprised by how much I've changed. "Oh, do you work out or what?" he said, surprised. "Yeah, thank you for noticing." We started hanging out, and I introduced him to my friend. He was charming, funny, and seemed like a different person. I thought maybe he had really changed. One day, we were out at a bar with some friends, and Chris had a bit too much to drink. He started getting aggressive, yelling at people and getting into fights. I tried to calm him down, but he turned on me. "You think you're better than me now, huh? Just because you're in college. You're still a loser, Alex. You always will be." I tried to ignore him and walk away, but he grabbed my arm and pulled me back. He was towering over me, his face twisted in anger. "You know what? I'm sick of you. I never should have apologized. You're still the same weak little nerd you always were." He tried to punch me, but I dodged it easily. I had been taking martial arts classes for the past few years. That was the workout I had, and I was ready for this moment. I looked at him, a sarcastic smile on my face. "You're right, Chris. I am weak, but you know what they say about revenge, right?" He looked confused for a moment, and then I kicked him in the stomach, sending him flying across the room. He tried to get up, but I was too quick. I grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back. "I've been waiting for this moment for a long time, Chris. You should have never messed with me. I thought you've changed." I held Chris in the lock for a few more seconds, making sure he felt the pain. He begged me to let him go, but I didn't listen. I wanted him to pay for what he did to me in high school. I wanted him to feel the same fear and pain that I had felt. Then I released him and he fell to the ground, whimpering. "I'm sorry, Alex. Please let me go," he cried. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should let him off the hook. But then I remembered all the times he had tormented me and how he had never shown any remorse until now. I decided that he needed to learn a lesson. "You're sorry." "You should have thought of that before you tried to attack me," I said. "Now you're going to pay for what you did." I released his arm and he fell to the ground, groaning in pain. I stood over him, watching him writhe on the floor. A small crowd had gathered around us, and I could see the shock and horror on their faces. "You're crazy, man." "What's wrong with you?" one of my friends said. I ignored him and turned to Chris. "You're going to apologize to me right now?" "In front of everyone," I said. Chris looked up at me, fear in his eye. He knew he had messed with the wrong person. I could see him trying to come up with something to say, but he was too afraid to speak. I decided to make it easy for him. "Here's the thing, Chris. I don't want to hurt you anymore. I just want you to leave me alone and never bother me or anyone else again."
Chris looked up at me, tears in his eyes.
"I'm sorry, Alex. I'm so sorry for everything I did to you," he said. I nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now get out of here and never talk to me again." Chris got up, still holding his arm, and stumbled out of the bar. I watched him go, feeling a sense of satisfaction wash over me. I had finally gotten my revenge on him. After that night, I never saw Chris again. He dropped out of college and disappeared. I heard rumors that he had gone back to his old ways, getting into trouble and causing trouble wherever he went. But I didn't care. I had moved on, and I was happy. So I, 18 male, have a stepmom that hates my guts. My stepmom can't remember her age at the moment. We'll call her C. So, when I first met C, I was 12 years old, I think, and I talked in a higher-pitched voice because the only voice I ever really heard was my mother's voice, and she would baby talk to me all the time. So I grew up talking in that voice, not being able to control it. Whenever I would talk to C, she would not answer me or talk back until I talked like a normal person. Yeah, I get it. I was probably annoyed. A little while later, I met her kids. They were 4 and 7 at the time, if I remember correctly, and they were lovely now. I don't like kids, but I really liked being around them. I treated them as my own blood sibling. A few years later, I was diagnosed with severe depression after my dad and stepmom found out about me harming myself. When they found out, they got pissed off at me and started taking my phone away from me, and they started making me do more chores. Now, I should probably mention that when I hear certain sounds, I get really overwhelmed or have really deep emotions depending on what the sound is. You know when people can't stand nails on a chalkboard. Well, that's what it's like for me, but with forks scratching on plates. I feel a strong feeling of anger whenever I hear it, and yes, I'm trying to get better at not getting angry. My mother had anger issues, and I guess I just got them from her. One of my stepsisters sat right in between me and her mom at dinner. She would constantly scratch her fork on her plate, and I couldn't stand it. It was like a pet peeve. I asked her to stop so many times, but she just wouldn't. Even my father would tell her to stop, but every time we asked, my stepmom would just get all pissy and say, "Don't tell her what to do. She's not your child. She can do whatever she wants, or I don't hear crap. Get over it. You're being damn dramatic." And I was asking nicely, too. At one point, I said, "Stop, or I will smack the fork out of your hand." I got so pissed off because she never stopped. Even after I asked, she would look straight at me and stretch her fork on her plate and say, "What's the problem?" It doesn't hurt anybody. My stepmom got pissed off and pulled me aside and told me I needed help. I went to school the next week and I was really overwhelmed because I had a lot of work to get done. I had a panic attack to the point where I got severely paranoid and started having auditory hallucinations. I went to my counselor and asked if she could call my dad because I felt like I needed to go to the mental hospital for a little while. My stepmom was getting in my head and making me scared of myself. She made me think that I was actually a really violent person. My dad took me to the hospital and told me he was proud that I asked for help for once. We spent about 23 hours in the hospital before I actually went to the mental hospital. I stayed in the mental hospital for a few weeks. Sometimes my dad would call me. On this one day when he called me, he told me that if and only if I don't get better, then me and him would have to move. I got better, got out of the mental hospital. And he drove me to a hotel because C kicked us out of our own house that my father paid to be built. He paid for almost everything inside of it as well. I stayed in the hotel for a few weeks, getting very little sleep. My dad sat down and talked to me and told me all the things C said about me to him behind my back. Saying things like, "Oh, well, she, because I'm trans and she can't accept it, hurts herself. Why wouldn't she hurt other people?" She also told other people that I was a really violent person. She even locked me out of my own house once while I was on my period because, in her words to my mom, "I don't want your kid to ruin my plans with my friends." She wasn't even at the house. So, maybe I'm a jerk for this part, but one day while me and my dad were still at the hotel, we went out with one of my friends in C, and her kids were there too. It was an Alice in Wonderland scavenger hunt thing. My dad told C ahead of time that I probably wasn't going to talk to her. Once we got there, I didn't talk to her the whole time we were together because she said things about me that weren't true. So why would I talk to her? Well, about a year ago, my father and C broke up. My dad came into my room one day and asked me if I cared at all that they broke up and if I missed her. I didn't say anything at first because I didn't want to be rude. He told me I could tell him the truth, so I told him that I didn't miss her and that I had bad feelings about her from the start, but I never told my dad about it because I knew being with her made him happy. He seemed happier with her than he ever was when it was just me and him. I was minding my own business, walking around the mall when I heard a loud, obnoxious voice shouting, "Excuse me, can I talk to the manager? This store has terrible customer service." I turned around to see an entitled Karen making a scene at a store nearby. She was waving her arms around and had a face like she was about to explode. I couldn't help but roll my eyes at her behavior. I had seen people like her before, always demanding special treatment and acting like the world owed them something. As I walked past her, I heard her shout, "This is unacceptable. I demand a discount for my inconvenience. I shook my head and kept walking, trying to ignore her. But as fate would have it, I ended up in the same store as her just a few minutes later. I was browsing through some clothes when heard her again. "Excuse me, do you work here?" she asked me, her tone dripping with entitlement. I turned to face her, trying my best to keep my annoyance in check. "No, I don't work here. Sorry." "Well, can you help me then?" she demanded, shoving her phone in my face. "I need to find this exact product in the next 5 minutes or I'll be late for my meeting." I raised an eyebrow at her. "And why should I help you?" "Because you're here, and I need help. It's your responsibility," she said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. I couldn't help myself. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that helping entitled people was part of my job description." Karen's face turned red with anger. "How dare you? I demand to speak to your manager right now." I shrugged. "Go ahead. They won't be able to help you find your product either." Karen huffed and stormed off. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction at shutting her down. As I was about to leave the store, I heard a commotion coming from outside. I walked towards the noise to see what was going on, and there was Karen again, screaming at another customer. "I demand that you give me your spot in line. My time is more valuable than yours." The other customer, a middle-aged woman, looked taken aback. "Excuse me, I've been waiting here for 20 minutes. I'm not giving up my spot." Karen crossed her arms. "Well, then you'll have to deal with the consequences," she said, her voice dripping with venom. I couldn't take it anymore. I walked up to Karen and said, "Excuse me, miss, but I don't think you understand how lines work. You can't just demand someone else's spot because you think you're more important." Karen turned to me, her face twisted in fury. "Who are you to tell me what to do?" "I'm just someone who's tired of entitled people like you ruining everyone else's day," I replied, my voice calm and even. Karen's eyes narrowed. "I have every right to be here and demand what I want," Karen yelled at me. "Actually, you don't. You're disrupting other customers and making a scene. It's not fair to them or the employees who have to deal with your unreasonable demands," I said, trying to reason with her. Karen took a step closer to me, her finger pointing at my face. "I don't have to listen to you. You're just a jerk who didn't want to help me. If you'd helped me, I'd have been long gone." Before I could respond, Karen's hand flew towards my face in an attempt to slap me. I quickly stepped back, avoiding the blow. The other customers in line gasped in shock, and the security guard rushed over to intervene. "Ma'am, you can't assault other customers," the guard said, trying to calm Karen down. "I was just defending myself against this rude person," Karen shouted, pointing at me. The guard turned to me. "Is this true?" I shook my head. "No, she tried to hit me because I called her out on her entitled behavior." The guard sighed. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the store." I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself down. I didn't want to let Karen's behavior ruin my day. I decided to take a walk around the mall to clear my head. As I walked out of the store, I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that I was done with Karen for good. But as I made my way through the parking lot towards my car, I saw her standing near the exit, her arms folded across her chest, waiting for me. My heart sank as I realized that this wasn't over yet. I tried to walk past her, hoping that she would ignore me and move on, but she stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "We're not finished yet," Karen said, her voice low and menacing. I rolled my eyes, feeling a surge of frustration. "What do you want now?" "You embarrass me in front of everyone. I won't stand for that kind of disrespect." "I didn't disrespect you. I just called you out on your entitled behavior," I said, trying to reason with her. Karen shook her head. "You have no idea what it's like to be me. You don't know the kind of pressure I'm under. I have a high-powered job and I have to deal with people like you every day. I don't have time for this nonsense." I raised an eyebrow. "So what do you want from me?" "I want you to go back to the store and grab me XYZ items that you refused to help me earlier." I was in shock by this outrageous entitlement of this Karen. I said, "No, lady, how can someone be this rude towards people and try to slap them and want them to do a favor at the same time?" She stood there looking at me. I thought she was finally convinced. But no, she said, "Are you going to get the items or not?" I burst out laughing. "You're crazy," and went to my car to leave this place before she demands I babysit her children. This happened in 2006. I was in the U.S. Air Force and deployed individually to Iraq, not with a unit. At the end of my rotation, I also took the rotator back by myself. It was a commercial 747 flight the military paid to take a bunch of us to the U.S. Back then, we'd typically wear our uniforms, even on commercial flights. The guy in the seat next to me was similarly redeploying and also in his uniform. This was usually never a problem because Americans were typically very kind to servicemen in their uniforms in public. I can't say how it is now because that was a long time ago. We had a layover in Ramstein, Germany, and civilians began boarding. These were mostly wives, children, and other dependents of those deployed to Europe. It had to be obvious that those of us already on the plane were coming back from deployment. We were in desert-patterned camo, glassy, eyed from mental and physical fatigue, and generally stunk of burned pits. Well, this woman with a baby comes right up to my seat and announces that we are in her seats. The other guy needs to move too, because she wants to put her kid there. We were both kind of bleary and just stared at her in surprise. I didn't care where I sat, but the stewardess hurried over and said the flight was full and they couldn't reseat us. This woman shoves her ticket in the stewardess's face and says it clearly shows my seat number on her ticket. She wants to kick me and my seatmate off the flight. Clearly, she was more entitled to it than us. She flips her luggage right in the middle of the plane and goes off on the stewardess. I stayed seated more out of shock than stubbornness. I'd been awake for longer than I cared to think about by that point, and I was not reacting quickly to anything. I guess my seatmate was in the same boat because neither of us said a single word to her or moved a muscle at all. We just watched her make a fool of herself in front of all these gawking passengers. She ended up getting herself kicked off the flight. In all, it happened rather quickly, but it still stunned me. The trip from Iraq to my home station was already going to be several days long, and she thought nothing of forcing me and that other guy off just for her convenience. I don't know why she popped in my head today, but I can't imagine being married to that. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more captivating stories. Share your own experiences, opinions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay tuned for more epic tales.